Tarrant County Master Gardener Association has partnered with the Tarrant Regional Water District to encourage water conservation. TRWD maintains 4 area lakes and pipelines needed to provide surface water to local water treatment plants so they can clean that water to meet drinking standards for our communities. They also work with many cities in Tarrant County, such as Fort Worth, Arlington, Mansfield, and many others, to provide water conservation programs to the community. Conservation is an important water supply strategy to help meet the needs of our growing population. There are currently 2.3 million people living in Tarrant County, and this is expected to double over the next 50 years. At SaveTarrantWater.com, you can sign up for free weekly watering advice custom to your location. If you're a resident of Tarrant County, you can sign up for a free sprinkler's checkup where a licensed irrigator comes to your home, provides a comprehensive evaluation of your system with recommendations to reduce water waste. There's also an event calendar where you can find information about future classes and workshops. So be sure and check out SaveTarrantWater.com to sign up for their free services.
Wasp and bees are a love-hate relationship for most people. I remember when Brahms here in Arlington had a beautiful row of Texas sage in full bloom in front of their business. The wasp and bees were just clouding the sky around them. The very next week, I watched as the landscape people dug all of those plants up. Guess why? Somebody had gotten stung and they sued Brahms. So it's something we have to be thinking about, at least, that wasps and bees can sting you. They may put you in the hospital. So if you're a person allergic to wasps and bees, you do have to take some real cautions. But most of them, most of the time, are just your friends. Let's introduce ourselves to the order of insects that they both belong to. Hymenoptera is bees and wasps and sawflies. And they're very similar. If you look at a wasp and look at a bee, the metamorphosis is complete on both of them. Eggs, larvae, pupa, adults, just like butterflies and moths. Most are winged, not all of them. Most are winged. And the ones that have wings, they have 2 pairs of wings. Some sting, not all of them, but some sting. If I'm looking at just the wasps, there are 18,000 different species of wasps in North America. We're not going to learn the names of all of them. It would take years and years to explore them all even. But one thing we do know is that wasps are not as fuzzy as bees. And the main section of a wasp hourglass shape is kind of real thin, and it doesn't have any hair on that little center section of the wasp. Wasps mostly feed on other insects and spiders, but the adult wasp does need to provide pollen to their larvae to help them develop. There are over 100 species of plants around the world, though, that rely solely on wasps to pollinate them. So it's not just bees that pollinate, wasps do too. If you think about figs, there are kinds of figs that we could not have at all had we not have the right wasps to pollinate them. About 10% of the wasp species globally are social. You're going to find groups of them. They live in colonies, single queen. They hunt their prey for their larvae. And the ones that are social are more aggressive than the solitary wasps. And they'll sting if they're bothered. A lot of them will sting if you bother them. But a lot of them, they aren't nearly as aggressive as we think of them being. The 3 main types of social ones that we see here are the paper one, the yellow jackets, and the bald-faced hornets. When I was about 4 years old, we lived on a highway out of Texarkana that they had big road signs along that highway. And now they're up several feet high, but then those big road signs were right down almost on the ground. And I had a brother who dared me to do things, and there was a group of little paper wasps that had started their little nest on the back side of this big sign. And my brother dared me to go and get one of the little nests and bring it to him. Well, my sisters and my friend was all with us, and I took the dare, of course, a little 4-year-old, whatever brother said, do, you do. So I went and got one of the little paper wasp nests, brought it to them. It still had 2 or 3 wasps on it. And of course, they run like crazy, and I drop it. But I didn't get stung. But I have been stung by wasps since then. Not all paper wasps are that forgiving. I had paper wasps at my door about 3 feet from my mailbox, and the mail carrier refused to deliver any mail till I got rid of the paper wasp. He was very afraid of them. But let's look at those 3 social wasps: the paper wasp, the yellow jackets, and the hornets. There's one of the paper wasps. That's one I see most often on the eaves of my house, and they build these little paper houses. They're really rather pretty wasps as you look at them, but they do sting. They usually, if they're foraging, are not aggressive, but they can sting even if you just get close to them sometimes. Here's another one of the paper wasps. This is the red one. There are several different ones that we will find here in Texas, but all of them have this very distinctive little paper wasp honeycomb. And the design in it is much like a honeycomb. It's the only one of the wasps that have that same type of design. They are going to protect their nest. And in spite of my experience as a 4-year-old, I would never go close to one now, because I'm quite sure that those wasps would not be kind to me. I think I would probably go with many different stings. Here is one. It's interesting about yellow jackets. There are quite a few different yellow jackets, but here's an eastern yellow jacket. Look at him closely. Here's the western yellow jacket. Can you see any difference? There is, but it's very, very slight. And we are kind of in the dividing line. With so many insects, we are the dividing line between the east and west different critters. The eastern ones, you will find more at the eastern part of Texas that will have a paper wasp nest like this, but it'll be in structures. Often it's inside walls or buildings. If you go then to the western side, you're going to have more of them that have an underground nest. Underground nest is usually what you run into. My son was mowing the backyard one summer, and all of a sudden, he hit a spot on the lawn that evidently he hadn't been mowing very much, because the yellow jackets came out of the ground and attacked him. And silly guy, he thought the water hose was turned on. He took it and turned it on full force on the yellow jackets, and all it did was make them very angry. He wound up with quite a few stings, really painful stings. So yellow jackets are usually in the ground or in a structure. Here is the other one that does a big group, and that is the bald-faced hornet. He's actually one of the yellow jackets, but you couldn't tell it by his color. But in Lake Tawakoni, we found a nest similar to this. Most of the hornets will be aerial hornet nests, so they're going to be up where you can see them. Just be careful. We had one of the kids with us in that group that threw a rock at the hornet's nest. Not a smart thing. They are extremely aggressive. They'll chase you. So those are our social wasps. Now, we have 90% of our wasps are solitary. And that's globally, not just here. They don't live in colonies. They do build some nests, and others are just parasitoid wasps. They lay their eggs directly on their prey. Here's some of our solitary wasps. There's others: mud daubers, cicada killers, sand wasps, digger wasps, parasitoid wasps, and potter wasps. Let's look at some of them. First of all, the mud dabber. This one I bet you've seen. Along the entrance of my house, I always have dabs of clay, and that's the result of their little nest. The female comes out, makes her nest, lays an egg, puts a spider or a caterpillar or something in the cavity, lays her egg, seals it up, and goes away. When the nest is all sealed up, it may look like this, although the ones I've had look more like this. And if you break one off the wall while before the wasps have come out, those little mud dauber cocoons will be in part of them. But in the others, you can see those are the remains of spiders that have been put in there to feed the little eggs. Once they have hatched out, oops, I'm sorry, I gotta go back. Once they've hatched out, the holes will be open at the end. So if you see a mud dauber nest and it has holes all over, you'll know it's just a piece of clay. It has there's nothing in there that's going to sting you. And the wasp does not mud daubers do not protect their nest. So unless they're right there on the nest, there's no fear of them bothering you. Here's one that really can frighten you. It's a cicada killer. For several years, I had one that had a hole right next to my garage wall, next to a sidewalk. And it was just a little hole in the ground, and it would come out. I saw it coming out, or I wouldn't have known that was its home. But it would come out and fly along, a few feet above the ground, and just like it was looking for something. And here's what it was looking for. They're called cicada killers because that's one of their main items that they get. Now, you think about cicada killer that, cicadas have cycles, and we think about 17-year locusts and things like that. And yet in Texas, there are cicadas that have a 1 year, a 2 year, 3 year, and 5 year cycles. So there can be any year plenty of cicadas out. But they do get the cicadas, and you can see it's twice the size of that cicada killer. And that cicada killer is large. It's the largest of the regular bees, wasps that we see here in Texas, the largest. I was at Texas Wesleyan outside the science room one day, and I saw several of these flying around, and I thought, what on earth? You only see one usually at a time. I asked the professor, and he said, oh, we're doing an experiment with cicada killers. I never did find the results of the experiment, but there were several of those flying around at that point. They may have a hole in the ground at the edge of the soil of the grass, but the one that I had was in open, just flat soil, a round hole. And I at first thought it was a spider's hole because it's a little larger than I would expect for the bees. So the hole might be in the edge of your lawn. They are not aggressive. They can sting and hurt, but they're not aggressive. If they're out foraging, they're not going to bother you. There are a lot of other kind of wasps. These are slightly smaller. There's a lot of sand wasps that you'll see them working on the ground a lot, and also the little digger wasps. You'll see them working on the ground a lot, and they all have a tendency to have a little hole in the ground where they are working and making their nest. And all of these wasps, the males do not sting. It's the females that sting. The males can often look like they're the aggressors because they'll be flying around like they're really active. And then we come to the tiny, tiny little wasps. These are the gall wasps. If you have an oak tree that has those big, well, they're almost the size of little balls. I would say about the size of a ping pong ball, and they'll start out as green and then they turn brown. We have one oak tree that I see every year that has these big balls, and I've wondered for years what they were, and then you finally find it's a little gall that stings the tree, and the tree obligingly makes the gall for it, or it helps it to. And then also you'll see galls that are all different shapes, like that fuzzy little ones at the top. And then if you want to see a parasitoid wasp do its job, if you have tomato hornworms, you often get a chance to see what the parasitoid wasps do, because this one shown here, it has been stung by the little wasp. Little cocoons are all, they've grown inside the caterpillar. They've popped up at the top, and now they're getting ready. And after a while, you'll see them emerge from those little white cotton things, and the caterpillar will be gone. So wasps do a service for us in many ways. A lot of what they do is, well, kind of interesting just to look at, but they do a real service for us in many ways. Let's think now about one that, well, is it really a wasp? Yes, it is. The velvet ant is a real wasp. There are 84, our A&M has figured out there are at least 84 different velvet ants in Texas. They all are similar in that the female has no wings. The males do have wings but don't sting. And the females have a very powerful sting. So if you see those little guys running around, it's not an ant. It can hurt. And I can swear to that because I played with those when I was a kid, and that's pretty stupid because they do hurt. So that's the end of our wasps. Now let's look at bees, because often they're confused. There are more than 800 species of bees in Texas. And most of us, we know the common European honeybee. They came to the United States in the 17th century, and we have had them ever since. When I was just a kid, my grandfather and his friends went down into the bottoms of East Texas, and they found a bee tree. They cut it down and harvested enough honey for several families to have honey for months from that huge bee tree. So they became wild bees, and now they're throughout the country, but mostly in managed beehives, and are very important commercially. But of the 700 that are native to Texas, they are serving us with pollinating fruit and vegetables and nut crops in ways that even the honeybee does not. Over 90% of the Texas native bees are solitary. And these, the female establishes and provisions the whole operation. They typically nest in the ground or in dead woody material. Usually they're harmless. Not always, but usually they're harmless. Here's our little honeybee. If you make the honeybee mad and it stings you, and all of those that you see in the hive are going to be the females with the stinger. There are males, but you're going to probably encounter the females. You're going to get stung, and it means the death of that bee, because when it stings you, the stinger is removed in the operation. And here is his very distinctive hive. Even if he's in the tree, he still has that distinctive hive. But what about other bees that are seemingly social? Well, here's one that seems like a social bee. He does have a little hive, and the bumblebee has, in his little community, he'll have from 50 to 400 bees. Whereas in a honeybee hive, we're talking about 20,000 to 80,000 bees in one hive. So these bumblebees, bigger bees, of course, but much fewer in a hive. Here's a few. It's kind of interesting. It's like little sausages if you look at the inside of a bumblebee's nest. It's not the same shape at all as you find in the honeybee. And they don't make honey for us. They just have enough to feed their crew, and that's it. And like I said, 50 to 400. There are 9 bumblebee species in Texas. And the first time I became aware of that was at a master naturalist meeting, and they were talking about how they're worried about the bumblebees because they are becoming fewer and fewer. Their 9 have been all identified in Texas, but more of them are in the east. As you go toward the Trans-Pecos, there are fewer and fewer of the bumblebees. You can get a chart from A&M that gives you the 9 different ones, so you can look at them and try to identify them in your backyard, but they all are similar with the pattern of they're fuzzy bodies and they're big. They nest in existing cavities, often underground. I have seen them in clumps of bunch grass. If you can see a clump of bunch grass and it's been there for several years, there's usually some cavity area that they can go in and make a nest. Otherwise, they usually use an old rodent hole. They do not make their own. Now, managed bumblebee hives have become a big business, and that's really an important thing. They have become big business during the past 2 decades as agriculture demand for bumblebee pollinated berries, peppers, and especially hothouse tomatoes. Because bumblebees have a special ability. Bumblebees' wings can beat 130 or more times per second. That's pretty fast. You try to do that. Wing speed and their large size enables the bees to perform what's called buzz pollination. They vibrate the flowers until it releases the pollen. The insect size also allows them to generate heat, and so the bumblebee can fly earlier and later in the day, as well as cooler, higher altitudes that honeybees can. So it's really important bee, the bumblebees are. Another one of our really important bees is the carpenter bee. If you look at this picture, you can see he's got a little black on his thorax. That's where he's got a pin that's been put. He's in somebody's collection. Here's another one. And they're shiny. They're not hairy. They're little hind end. They're called shiny hiney. It helps you identify the carpenter bee. And there are quite a number of different ones, and they're a little bit different in size, but for the most part, they're a big bee. I became acquainted with the carpenter bee in a not too happy situation. The timbers at the roof of my house, they decided was a perfect place to make their home, and they bored holes into it. They're seldom as destructive as termites, but carpenter bees can cause cosmetic and structural damage. They'd caused enough damage that we had to cut about a foot off of that timber to get rid of where they nested. So they can be a little bit of a problem, but they again are extremely good for pollinating. The female carpenter bee will dig out a new tunnel in wood for laying the eggs, or they'll enlarge old ones. Adult carpenter bees hibernate during the winter, usually in abandoned nest tunnels. So that tunnel that they use during the year, they may use it again for hibernation. And they are buzz pollinators because they're very large, very fast. They can buzz pollinate. A nest, and this is an interesting thing because most solitary bees, you have one female, but in carpenter bees, there can be as many as 4 and 12 males. I haven't been able to look at mine close enough to see if there were 4 females or 12 males. I don't think I'm going to handle them. They are excellent pollinators of eggplants, tomatoes, and other vegetables and flowers. And this next statement, I think is important for us to know because carpenter bees are worldwide. In various regions of the world, large carpenter bees are important pollinators, especially in Brazil. They pollinate passion fruit and Brazil nuts. Australia, they're used to greenhouse for the tomatoes. In the Middle East, they pollinate the cotton. So very important bee for pollination of interesting things around the world. Another one of our bees that's important to us is mason bees. Again, a very important pollinator. Varies in size. There are several different ones. One's called the blue mason bee. It's important in orchards more. But this little bee is one that we'll use our bee hotels. They are major pollinators of orchards and some commercial crops. There are 140 species of mason bees in North America. And they use mud in their nest. If it's a pre-existing cavity, they'll line it with mud, and they use mud to stop the entrance to it. The female is considered non-aggressive. The males of the mason bees will often fly around like they're protecting things, and so people will swat at them thinking they're going to get stung, and they're not. They can't sting you anyway. Here's a little bit of the history of how they do set it up. Bee chooses the location, hollow stem, cracks in between stones, cavities in the wood, lots of places a mason bee might choose. In the spring, when the mason bees emerge from the nest, the females will mate and then search for a new nesting site soon after. They will collect pollen and nectar to create a mixture that they put in with their nest, with their egg that they lay, as a provision for the developing brood. So the mason bees, like many of the others, they're out of sight over the winter, come out, mate, and go. Here's another interesting bee, and I hope you've got a chance to see these little leafcutter bees. They're smaller, most of them. And again, there are a variety of them. But you see a little bit of green in their mouth. You could suspect that if you look around, you'll probably see a branch that has little circles cut out of it. And that little bee is taking those back to their site and using them to line their nest and to cap it off. They are super pollinators. They're tiny, friendly, and they rarely sting. And it says they're less painful. I haven't been stung by a leafcutter bee, so I don't know. There are 242 species in North America, so a lot of different leafcutter bees. The holes in the leaves, they're just cosmetic. They aren't going to hurt them. And since they are such important ones, we certainly don't want to lose any of them. One type of leafcutter bee that is not a native was intentionally introduced to parts of North America to pollinate, guess what? Alfalfa plants. And it's said that one leafcutter bee is worth 20 honeybees. They're that much more efficient. And then we have those little iridescent sweat bees. If you've ever had been outside and been really perspiring, and one of those little guys lands on you, he's not trying to sting you usually. He's trying to get the minerals from your skin. That's why he's called sweat bees. They will sting, but they very seldom do. I've had them crawl around on me and wanted to swat them, but I knew if I swat them, then they will sting. Their sweat bee is a name for a whole family of bees, the Halicidae. But it's interesting. They're the most prevalent of the bees after honeybees. They are found globally, and they're the most prevalent. They're tiny, only a half-inch long, most of them. And they can be social or solitary. Different species are different there. But they do typically nest underground again. So you're going to see their holes. They have a metallic body. They're mostly green. I have seen them blue and purple, and I've seen them also that look more like a real pale green, almost yellowish. Sweat bees aren't as fuzzy as other bees, and we often think that they're flies. But remember, flies have one set of wings. Bees and wasps have two sets of wings. Okay, so we got all these bees now. And there are so many kinds of bees. But what do I do if I want them in my yard? First of all, I plant lots of native plants. Plant a lot of them, and not when you're planting them, think about numbers. Plant them in groups of 3 to 5. That way you've got enough of one particular plant for the bees or wasps to really want to come and pollinate and get the nectar. So groups of all kinds. The next criteria is you need blossoms every month of the year. Make sure that from spring to fall, you have something out there blooming for the wasp and bees to come and enjoy. And then think about where they're going to nest. Like that cicada killer, they may just be a single hole, like the one at the left, and then they may be like the multiple holes that I saw at Texas Wesleyan, or some of the other bees that they want to be in a group. So you've got a bunch of bee holes. They may be a little smaller, usually no larger than the cicada killer, which is about the size of some of the spider ones that do. So you need nest sites, you need soil where they can get to it. And you also need to think about your leaf litter. When you rake up leaves and put them in a bag and send them to the landfill, you are destroying the habitat for some of those overwintering females that are going to be coming out next year to pollinate for you. Many of them are in that leaf litter or in the ground right below that leaf litter. So that's a protective coat you want to leave there as late in the spring as you can because of that, and then put them on your own compost heap. The other thing to think about is undisturbed soil. You know, we like to dig, and we dig, and we dig, and we dig, and we sometimes make it so soft that they can't have a sturdy tunnel to place their little holes, little caves where they plant their seed, their eggs, and the little babies work their way through and then come back out in the spring. So undisturbed soil is a good thing to have some soil that's not covered with mulch, not covered with anything, just little openings maybe between bushes and trees and your other plants. What else do we need? Well, we could make a bee house. And this is kind of interesting to have a bee house because I want to show you. You notice this little guy right here? When they first started making little bee hotels, they call them. When they first started making little bee hotels, I got this one. I haven't used it. It's just kind of a novelty. But we have classes in it that you can learn how to make your own. Hang them up. Let's see which bees come. The carpenter bees, the mason bees, the leafcutter bees are three that we know will come to them. And there are other things other than wasps and bees that will come. It does take some maintenance. So once you establish some of the little bee hotels, you might want several of them, and then learn how to manage them so that every year you're taking care of it so it'll be good the next year. So it's great for education, if nothing else, because it helps you see what's out there, what's in your yard, and it gives you a chance to be up close with a lot more of the wasp and bees. This is one thing, though, that I think we all need to think about. Reduce the use of toxic pesticides. Don't use any more than you absolutely have to, because every spray you spray or every chemical you spread has a bad result of getting rid of things you don't want to get rid of. And we know that even though wasps can sting and some bees can sting, they do a real service for us, and we don't want to kill off our wildlife. They're our garden friends. So whether you've got bumblebees or little sweat bees or brown ones, think about keeping as many of them as you can in your yard, giving them every opportunity, a ground that suits, flowers that make them happy, and just don't get excited and try to kill all of them that are in your yard. To sum it up, there are two statements here I'd like to share with you. Wasps provide us with free, eco-friendly, natural pest control services. Think about the wasps that collect caterpillars and spiders and everything else to poke in their little cells. In a world without wasps, we would need to use more toxic pesticides to control the insects that eat our crops and carry diseases. And wasps also pollinate. Bees are a keystone species. If bees die off, it would end a lot of life because in nature, various animals depend on the bees for their survival because their food sources, nuts, berries, seeds, and fruits, rely on insect pollination. I want to appreciate you folks for listening to me tonight, but also I want to mention one name. Haley, who has a blog called Native Backyards, is in San Antonio. She's a master naturalist, and she had given me permission to use some of her pictures, and I want to thank her publicly for that permission. And also, if you want to know more about her, it's Native Backyards is her blog, and you can look it up. And now we're ready for questions.
Okay, so if you have any questions, please enter them in the Q&A. I have also put an evaluation link in the chat box. We would ask that you maybe complete that before you leave the presentation tonight. But also Nancy will send you a copy of that link along with a link to view the video again if you wish to do so. I've got Hester on the phone right now, so if you have any questions, please enter them and she will answer them for you. Okay, Hester, you ready? Do carpenter bees seal themselves into their holes when they hibernate? Okay, she said as far as she knows, they do not seal their holes. Okay, and there's a comment that says they really enjoyed the presentation. Yeah, I know native bees are in trouble. Are they getting any better? No. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, Esther says on that question about native bees being in trouble, best thing we can do is avoid using insecticides, that can harm our bees. Also, maybe encourage the city to not be spraying, for all the insects because it kills everything when it comes in contact with it. So those are some of the best things we can do. Of course, have good plants for pollination also. Maybe the bee houses and that kind of thing. Okay. What would you say to children when they indicate they are afraid of bees? That's good. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Hester said the best thing to do is to make sure the kids don't get right up close to the bees. If they see them on the plants, they're searching for food, and remind them that they're not going to be harmful, at that point in time. So we need to reassure them that way, that unless they bother the bee, they're probably not going to come after them unless they get near their nest or something like that, especially in regards to yellow jackets and stuff like that. Do yellow jackets also make a honeycomb type nest? Similar. She says similar. Okay, so the whole outside's covered. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah, so it's covered more like a hornet's nest on the outside. Okay. And don't some of the yellow jackets make nests in the ground? Yeah. Yeah, we had a guy at the school come out and spray for them, and he sprayed into that hole and he got stung too. So yeah, they can also nest in the ground. Okay. Um, where can they find out which plants attract certain bees and wasps? For example, we always see sweat bees on sunflowers. Okay. Yeah, Hester says the sweat bees tend to be more specific than the others. But yes, probably there are some special things. Just have a variety is the best way to address that. Let's see. Here's a question about does the city spraying for mosquitoes hurt the bees? And of course, we've already answered that question. The answer is yes, they definitely do because that's an all kill stuff they spray. So yes, yes. Donna says I apply Kaolin Day clay to the leaves of my plants to make them taste bad to pests. Does this practice hurt the pollinators? Yeah. Hester says yes, it would definitely be impacting some of the pollinators, especially the crickets and things like that. Um, I think that's. Is there any other questions? The video worked great, by the way, Hester. Yeah. She says thank you. We'll see you again. All right. Thank you, Hester. All right. Bye. Okay. I think we answered all of them. Are there any other questions? And we can also maybe have you unmute if you want to. Nancy, anything else?
No, just remind them again if they will go to the chat box and click on the link for feedback for this presentation. We appreciate your time and joining us. And we will also be sending you a follow-up email, as Dick mentioned earlier. It will have that link if you miss it at this point. We'll also have the handout that Hester had available earlier. And we'll also have a link, a YouTube link, where you can view this presentation again if you wanted to go back and look at some of the specific information about certain wasps or certain bees.
Okay.
Just
Thank
appreciate
everybody
you,
for
Dick.
coming.
Yeah, thank you. Thank Dick and Teresa and Claire, and especially Hester. Sometimes we have to go to plan B when technology doesn't work.
I
So
know.
we appreciate everyone joining us this evening.